one of the period sources of the time. We are singing from that. And this is the form of this song is a ballad, which means that you have the first section twice, albeit with two different endings, and then a B section. It's quite short. So here we go. So easy. So is mine heart is with you, I'll go where that you go. My heart is with you, go wherever you go. And there's this lovely melody. Well, you can tell, doing this, it's not without jeopardy. doing it from this, but the benefits certainly outweigh the challenges. So this is a song which was certainly popular on the continent in the mid to later 15th century, and we find that there is at least one mass which takes as its formative material the song that you just heard. So there's a mass by a rather obscure composer, Guillaume Le Rouge. We don't know much about him. He's probably worked in the court of Charles d'Orléans, himself a great poet. And Guillaume Le Rouge knew this song and wrote a mass, an entire mass, mass cycle, so Kyrie, Radio Sanctus Sanctus, using this material. And we're going to hear the Kyrie of that in a moment. It's a rather unusual way of borrowing from the original, in as much as what Le Rouge does is take the tenor part, which Nick was singing, and repeat the notes exactly, but change the rhythm. So just before we do this Kyrie, we're going to just demonstrate that. So Nick's just going to sing maybe the phrase of the verse of the song. So is absolutely note for note the same, with differences in rhythm, and each movement of the mass has the same tune but in different rhythmic formulations. What this means is that the sound of the mass is it seems very familiar if you know the song. It's like I suppose it's that difficulty which facial recognition software no doubt gets around, which is you kind of see a similarity in the face, but there's something different as well. There's something familiar and yet different. We see patterns in people's faces. But we're going to just sing you the first phrase of the song again.
May I just ask,
yes.
The song, was it 2 tenors and an alto? Is that the configuration?
That's right, yes. So what you've got is 2 parts which essentially overlap, and then a top voice. So we're going to sing you the first little segment of this song, and then I think you can hear how it translates into the Kyrie. So is we pretty much hit that cadence in the same way. It takes a bit longer to get there, but it is very much, once you hear them side by side, I think you'll agree that you get very similar sort of trajectory. So we're again singing this from a facsimile. This is from a choir book, rather than a chansonnier. And in fact, turn the page and you get the full layout. And this is a choir book called to its friend San Pietro V80, so it's from St. Peter's in the Vatican. And one of the really nice things about this, so singing from facsimile has all sorts of joys associated with it, but entering into the choral, to the culture of these singers is one such. And if you see just here, you've got a little inscription which says Volue Arcangele, which means Well, voluer means turn over. So it's an instruction to a singer. Actually, we know that there was a singer called Archangel in St. Peter's at that time. Turn over the page. Yeah, Archangel. So he is taking the part of hopefully turning in time. Okay, so we're going to give you the whole of this curated now.
Just to ask that obviously you've shown people the manuscript, so people have got an idea of a choir book and a chanson a little bit. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on your comments a little bit about the jeopardies that go with singing from this, and you also mentioned that the benefits far outweigh the hindrances. But I'm wondering if you could explain that for people who maybe don't know that a little bit more, just so that people get a gauge of why it is that you feel that reading from this notation is more important, or maybe puts you in a different place to reading from your standard modern score.
Can I put
So what's really interesting about these parts that's like fundamentally different to a modern score is that rather than having all of the, say, 3 parts all like next to each other, so what everyone's singing at the same time is on top of one another, you have the 3 parts all laid out on the same page, but all individually. So you see them each as independent melodies with their line, but you have no way of knowing how those lines sit on top of one another. And so obviously, if things go wrong, it makes it a lot harder to get back in, because you can't see what the other parts are doing and how you fit with that. You guys have to sort of be so familiar with it that you can remember how it sounds. But a nice thing about singing your own line is that you really have a sense of your individual melody, your own parts. This notation is kind of a bit more squished together often than a modern bars would be kind of quite stretched, and so you really see the shape in like your whole line. You just think about that much space on the page, as you really see its rises and falls. Another challenge is that singing an alto part is not in the treble clef, it's in a C clef, which means that all the notes look different to how you normally read. And again, you guys are in C3 10 clef, which is amazing.
Another wonderful thing about the not having the bar lines like we do in modern lot more horizontal, then they just feel a lot more linear than they do in modern scores. Because in modern scores, you have bar lines that are kind of these visual barriers almost. But here you have full note values, you have no ties, you have no bar lines. Another challenge with these is, and I can turn it around again, that in this period we have a lot of liberty in putting the text in. So in the first period, we put in 3 periods because that's sort of the traditional thing to do. But you can see there's just period and then a lady song right at the very end. But we have liberty in putting in sort of where we want to place the words.
Is it 3 or is it 4 or 5 lines?
It's three.
3 voice parts, but
No,
5 lines on the
5
stage.
lines, because plain song is 4 lines, isn't it?
When it comes to expanding on what Kate was saying just there with text, the performance of these kinds of songs has been a subject of some sort of debate and experimentation over the years, because it's only the top part which actually bears text, you see, and the other parts only give the beginnings of the text. So you will hear performances where these lower parts are performed on instruments, and you'll hear versions where these lower parts are vocalized but with no words, so to who or are, something like that. The debates about this are long and sometimes somewhat caustic, but it seems to me that there's no problem with taking the text and putting it to the notes, so long as you know the notes well enough. And in fact, it becomes one of the great sort of improvisatory joys of performance, that you can mix it up when you have a repetition. You can do it a different way. So it feels very liberating.
Back to the old adage of every performance being genuinely different.
Yes.
Somebody actually said to me the other day that could be seen as a kind of what we would call mise en page, so a pagination element as well to do with stamina, which I've never really thought about before, but I think it actually has a relevance to this, whereby you can see the entirety of the section that you're working with in one block. So in one score, one of the really hard things is that if you're singing, for example, a Gloria or a Creed, whereby the text is long and you maybe in Renaissance counterpoint can be going for 20 pages, for example, in one movement, you have no idea of how far through you are. So it's really hard to get a gauge, singing-wise, of how much stamina one needs in order to be able to go through. In the choir book, you'll find that things are grouped according to little sections of a Gloria, and then you will turn over the page, as Edward says, and then go on to a new section. But that section is all within your view. Each section is all within your view. You see the entirety of it in one little block. So you have a gauge of how far through you are at any given point. So from a vocal perspective, a stamina perspective, of where you are, how much you have to give it. If you're a tenor, for example, and you've got 3 notes at the top of your register, and they're very high notes, and we all know that you can't continually sustain that kind of singing, then you have a visual gauge. You know exactly where they are in your line. You might be 3/4 of the way through. You can make sure that you save enough for when you need them, and vice versa. So actually, I'm wondering if there's also an element of being able to see the entirety. It's first of all more linear, but then there's also an overall perspective from a pagination side of things. I certainly haven't thought about that. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't thought about that before. It seems like something that's worth looking at in terms of the layout. Does anybody else have any questions that they might like to just ask the guys about this music? Please do feel free. Don't feel like bound.
In the imagery of these sort of faint circles in the background, is that anything in relation to what you're...
Sorry, do you mean these illuminations here?
No, sorry,
In the other? Oh yes, that might just be the watermark of the you mean that?
Yes.
Oh yes, that's just the
That's the
watermark.
watermark.
Yeah.
Which is one of the sometimes how they
It doesn't make
But
sure.
back in that period, was there a universal formula for producing music? written standard
Do
universal.
you mean the notation or the actual manuscript itself?
The notation.
The notation, yes. Well, there's a sort of language which developed through the 14th century and finds a kind of stability in the beginning of the 15th century. I suppose, other than the things that we've already talked about, the most curious aspect of it is that whilst modern notation is rhythmic durations are fairly stable. So if you see a semi-breve, you know that it's worth 2 minutes, for instance. In this notation, the length of a semi-breve or the length of a breve is dependent on the time signature or mensuration sign. So there's a lot more fluidity in the way that in the way that it's produced and the way that you respond to it. So that's very, when one teaches this to students, that's the first thing that they have to get their head around. But it's not an absolute kind of rhythmic notation at all. It's very much contextual. And the length of a note may well depend on what comes before and after it.
One of the things that is actually quite nice, I think, about the 15th century as opposed to the 16th century is that most of this is, of course, manuscript, so it's handwritten in that sense. So you do get differentiation continually.
Yeah,
it's one of the nice things, the imagery.
Yes, handwriting style.
Yeah, exactly, calligraphic style, different scribes and different outputs because of that. And that's one of the nice things is that you pick up different manuscript or chansonnier and it looks visually quite different. Some of them, actually, this is one of the other interesting. Some of them are quite clear with regard to how you might place text, and some of them are not. So the way that it's presented also has a bearing, would that be right to say, on how easy it is as a singer to input and make sure that the text is where you want it to be, which we don't think about now because all of that's already done for us in the modern edition. So we just literally have to take the data and then put it out there everywhere like a computer in a sense. But here you do have to think on the fly, which is an entirely different processing skill. Do we have any?
I was just going to say that's all very well if you're singing one to a part. If there's 2 or 3 to a part, placing the words and such like must be quite a lot of non-verbal communication between you.
Indeed, non-verbal communication, but indeed the same kind of non-verbal communication that happens in an orchestra when they're lining their podium, for instance.
Yeah.
And it does sometimes mean non-verbal, because if you have longer to rehearse, then you will actually spend time discussing that, making decisions as a collective group. But
You can watch that in action tomorrow at our recital.
It's fair to say that that's also context related as well. We're judging that on 21st century performance idioms. So there's an expectation of perfection, i.e. people putting it in the same place. If you read 15th century theory and accounts of the time, you will find that there are lots of talk of what we might classify as cacophony. So people were not placing the text at the same time, but it's whether or not that is seen as okay. And in daily fare, that would be seen as okay. We've got to a point now in the 21st century whereby everything is concert related, so everything is expected to be perfect all the time because of recording. And that has changed what we expect from this music. It's not necessarily historically accurate. Anything else?
Yes, presumably this music has developed on from plain song, has it, or not particularly? Is it related to earlier plain song?
That's quite a big question.
How big's the calendar?
But I suppose one way of answering is this. So what we presented today is very much secular, so it's less related to chant than perhaps sacred repertoire. And this is a different kind of mass to the kind of mass which uses a plain chant and builds upon.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Wow. I suppose we better wrap this up at the end of our. But thank you ever so much to Edward and the gang for presenting today, and let's give them a round of applause.